Many of you will have wondered by now whether Russia's invasion of Ukraine is even legal, and if illegal, what law it's in contravention of, and what other countries can legally do about this. Well, the laws and enforcement of those laws between countries generally depends on the cooperation of those countries, and therefore we have various international conventions, international charters, and groups of countries that work together for common aim to enforce what is known collectively as international law. For example, the United Nations and the United Nations Charter. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization which aims to provide and maintain peace and security between those nations and to help and support each other by way of cooperation and enforcing and upholding international law. On the 24th of February 2022, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on Russia to stop its invasion of Ukraine, stating that the use of force by one country against another is the repudiation of the principles that every country is committed to uphold. This applies to the present military offensive, referring to the Russian invasion. It is wrong. It is against the United Nations Charter. It is unacceptable, but it is not irreversible. He said, "Stop the military operation, bring the troops back to Russia. We know the toll of war." And Professor Hannam, who is a professor of international law, says he believes it's important to remember that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is illegal, but enforcing the law is challenging, as armed conflicts around the world demonstrate all too clearly. He explains that international law is a set of rules and standards that govern relations between different countries, and that these countries develop and agree these laws that become international law and standards which are aimed to maintain peace throughout each nation. Much of this law comes about by international treaties, sometimes referred to as conventions, and as such they form legally binding commitments of the countries when they join such an international organisation and sign up to adhere to their charter. Now, one of the ways of enforcing such law is through the International Criminal Court, which, very broadly speaking, operates in a similar fashion to any other criminal court, only on an international scale. Some of the similarities include that any defendant is considered innocent until proven guilty, and the burden still lies with the prosecutor. And when prosecuting any offence, the prosecutor must collect and disclose both incriminating and exonerating evidence. This is known as disclosure in the criminal world, and this is an ongoing duty of disclosure. The test for disclosure, at least in England and Wales, is that any material that is reasonably capable of undermining the prosecution case or assisting the defence must be disclosed to said defendant. As I mentioned earlier, and with other international organisations, the International Criminal Court depends generally on cooperation of various jurisdictions. The ICC does not have its own police force or an enforcement body, and therefore it relies on the cooperation of countries worldwide for support when making arrests, transferring arrested people for detention, where there is a detention centre in The Hague, freezing any suspect's assets, and enforcing any sentences that it imposes upon a guilty verdict. The ICC's founding treaty is called the Rome Statute and gives the ICC jurisdiction over four main crimes. First of which, very broadly categorised as genocide, which is the specific intent to destroy whole or part of a nation based on the ethnic, racial, or otherwise religious groups by killing its members or causing serious bodily or mental harm to its members. Secondly, the ICC prosecutes general crimes against humanity, which are serious violations committed as a part of a large-scale attack against any civilian population. Thirdly, the ICC prosecutes war crimes, which are considered to be grave breaches of the Geneva Convention, which in the context of an armed conflict include, for example, the use of child soldiers, or the killing or the torture of persons, including civilians or prisoners of war, or intentionally directing attacks against hospitals, historic monuments, or buildings dedicated to religion, education, science, or charitable purposes. Finally, the ICC also prosecutes crimes of aggression. Crimes of aggression would include the use of an armed force by a state against the sovereignty or the integrity or the independence of another state. This is all relevant, of course, because just a few days ago, the ICC prosecutor has announced that they are starting an investigation into possible war crimes in and against Ukraine. The prosecutor of the ICC in The Hague has announced that an investigation is going to commence into possible war crimes or crimes against humanity in Ukraine, broadly as I've outlined just now. stating that although Ukraine was not a member of the ICC, it has awarded jurisdiction to the court. And he has said that there are grounds to open an investigation based on preliminary investigation of previous events last year and on the current events in Ukraine. It's also reported that Ukraine has also taken Russia to the International Court of Justice for having launched an invasion on the pretext of false claims of genocide perpetrated against the country's Russian speakers. So in short, the resounding consensus is that the invasion of Ukraine is not legal. As summarized by the UN Secretary General, as I repeat, the use of force by one country against another is the repudiation of the principles that every country is committed to uphold. This applies to the present military offensive. It is wrong, it is against the United Nations Charter, it is unacceptable. So as indeed there is always more than one side to a story, the international consensus is that this is not legal, from the UN Secretary General to Professor Hannam. So I hope this video was a useful explanation. Please give the video a thumbs up and remember to subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.